Breaking now, New York City Police and Mayor Eric Adams say they have a strong person of interest in custody in the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Police have identified 26-year-old Luigi Mangione as the person of interest. He was arrested in a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, after police say an employee there recognized him and called in a tip. Police say he was acting suspiciously and was carrying multiple IDs, including an ID that matched the one used in the check-in at the hostel before the shooting. Police also say they found a gun that appears to be a ghost gun capable of firing a 9mm round. It's similar to the one that killed Thompson. They also recovered a suppressor, a mask, and a 3-page handwritten document that speaks to his motivation and mindset. Police say the document mentions no specific threats for others, but shows ill will toward corporate America. New York officials say they are en route to speak to Mangione and have applauded everyone who helped in the search.
For just over 5 days, our NYPD investigators combed through thousands of hours of video, followed up on hundreds of tips, and processed every bit of forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, IP addresses, and so much more to tighten the net. This combination of old-school detective work and new-age technology is what led to this result today.
This is Mangione's first arrest.
The Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria.
President Biden delivered remarks on Sunday after rebel forces successfully overthrew Syria's brutal dictator, President Bashar al-Assad. The group launched a surprise attack on the country's largest city, Aleppo, on November 30th and swept through major cities in just 10 days. Assad fled the country before opposition fighters entered the capital, arriving in Moscow on Sunday. Russia has granted asylum to Assad and his family. Joining me now is the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels, with the latest. Hey, Brett, thanks for joining us. This was a stunning collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. The armed rebel alliance was able to sweep across major cities in under 2 weeks. What do we know about that group?
Yeah, so this rebel group is essentially a coalition of sort of different rebel forces. The main one goes by the acronym HTS, has been sort of leading the charge here. But ultimately, that's what makes this, I think, so surprising to some degree, is that you had a number of different rebel groups that were sort of uniting here essentially to sweep through these major Syrian cities. Obviously, this concluded in the capital in Damascus, and they toppled the Assad government. But certainly the fact that there wasn't one unified rebel group, or that HTS was not the only group of rebels leading this fight, I think raises a lot of interesting questions about kind of what comes next, about how Syria will be governed moving forward, and about who effectively, replaces the Assad government and what comes next for Syria.
Yeah, and Brett, Bashar al-Assad and his family have been granted asylum in Russia, like I mentioned, after arriving in Moscow yesterday. The Assad family ruled for 50 years in Syria. Is the Syrian government still operational at this moment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's one that a lot of different governments around the world, including the United States, are keeping a close eye on, because obviously the Assad government is no more. He's fled for Russia. And so now I think attention turns to HTS, this rebel group, as sort of the obvious group that will sort of fill the vacuum of leadership in Syria. But there are a lot of questions about how exactly the government will operate. As you said, it's unclear whether the government itself can stand up, whether it is sturdy enough to sort of rule over the country for both the short term and the long term, if this is just going to be sort of different warring factions that will be competing for power here. But certainly with the absence of the Assad government, it opens up a lot of questions about who fills that void, whether it is HTS, whether it's a different rebel group, or some kind of coalition government that forms here.
Yeah, and President Biden has called this a historic moment for the Syrian people, and he's hoping for a peaceful transfer of power. The U.S. military, of course, has some troops stationed in the country, and over the weekend struck 75 ISIS targets there. What's the administration's stance going forward, and will additional forces deployed to the region?
So no indication initially that there'll be additional forces in the region, but as you mentioned, the U.S. Struck these ISIS targets, and that is part of this broader goal from the Biden administration, from the U.S. government, to try and ensure that ISIS does not gain a foothold, that this vacuum of power with the fall of the Assad regime doesn't lead to a resurgence of ISIS, or that ISIS doesn't necessarily, use this essentially to reestablish power and influence in the region. So I think that's one thing that the Biden administration in particular and allied governments will be watching really closely is to see how ISIS responds to this, whether there is some sort of push for them to reestablish influence in the region. But certainly, I think that will be top of mind, as President Biden said on Sunday, will be to be closely monitoring the situation and to make sure that this doesn't lead to a resurgence of ISIS or another major terrorist group.
And President Biden also announced that he believes that journalist Austin Tice, who disappeared in Syria 12 years ago, is still alive. What do we know about that search for Tice?
Yeah, so President Biden offered sort of limited details on this. He did say that they believe Austin Tice, the freelance journalist who disappeared in August 2012, and has only been seen really in a video shortly after that, a hostage video. President Biden said that they believe he's alive, but he didn't really have other information as far as his whereabouts, if they believe they're close to being able to return Austin Tice home. Austin Tice's family has in recent days come out and said that they have information from what they believe is a reliable source confirming that their son Austin is alive. So there is sort of this spark of hope around Austin Tice's situation, coinciding with the fall of the Assad government. And I think this will also be very closely watched, especially by press freedom groups, about whether they can locate him and whether they can actually bring him home after 12 long years.
And Israel, meanwhile, announced that it has seized control of Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, and it's also carried out airstrikes at strategic weapon systems. This is the first time since 1973 that Israel's actually captured territory in Syria. What's Netanyahu's strategy here?
Yeah, I think this is sort of what we're going to see more broadly from these other neighboring leaders, is this effort to sort of respond to the fall of the Assad regime and essentially try to fill the void and make sure that Israel, for example, is working into the territory along its border in the Golan Heights. Obviously, the Golan Heights were recognized by former President Trump during his first term as Israeli territory. So I think, Israel's certainly stepping in, trying to make sure that nothing happens to that area, that they are secure, and that they can, make sure that the fall of the Assad government doesn't lead to some rival proxy group taking over that territory, breaking out into a wider war, a more unstable situation. Turkish forces, for example, have also been sort of fighting in parts of Syria now. So I think the fall of the Assad government, what we're going to see is people, forces like in Israel, like in Turkey and elsewhere, are going to be sort of trying to step into the void to make sure that they solidify any gains, to make sure that they remain stable, and that other rival proxy groups don't try to, take advantage of the situation or create more instability.
Yeah, lots of attention can be focused on that region in the days, weeks, and months to come. Brett Samuels, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
Shifting gears, the woman alleging that she was sexually assaulted in 2000 by Sean Diddy Combs when she was only 13 years old has amended her lawsuit to include allegations that she was also assaulted at the same party by Jay-Z. Releasing a lengthy statement in response, Jay-Z denied those allegations, claiming that the civil suit was an attempt to blackmail him. News Nation's Elizabeth Pran has the latest.
According to the legal documents, this 13-year-old at the time, this was in September of 2000, was outside of the VMAs speaking with limo drivers and other folks around, and she was speaking with P. Diddy's limo driver at the time, trying to convince him that she wanted to go to a celebrity after party. And, quote, she fit what he was looking for, according to these documents, and she was taken to a celebrity after party. She said she recognized people there, she began drinking, and felt a little bit woozy, needed to lay down. She went to a bedroom that, quote, contained only a large bed, no furniture of any kind, television, or other furnishings. She says P. Diddy, as well as Jay-Z, came into the room with an unnamed third person. They call that person a female, celebrity B. It's at that time she claims to have been raped by Diddy as well as Jay-Z while the woman stayed inside of the room and watched. She then said she was visibly distressed. No one assisted her at the party. She left, went to a gas station, called her father, and was picked up and was able to go home. Now, over the past 24 hours, there's been a back and forth between the legal team representing Jay-Z and then the attorney, Tony Busby. So Jay-Z releasing a very heartfelt, personal statement. He said, only your network of conspiracy theorists, fake physics will believe the idiotic claims you've levied against me, if not for the seriousness surrounding harm to kids, would be laughable. He referenced his family in this statement and these claims being baseless. Now, Busby has responded as well. They are certainly going back and forth, saying his client only sought confidential mediation. Quote, since I sent the letter on her behalf, Mr. Carter has not only sued me, but he's tried to bully and harass me and this plaintiff. His conduct has the opposite impact. She is emboldened. So he's referring to the fact that he does face a extortion suit filed by an anonymous man. I will say that Busby is a fairly high-profile attorney in Texas. He has said he represents at least 100 women who have been victims of P. Diddy, but he has worked on other very big cases, including the big oil spill, including representing Ken Paxton, Astroworld. What he has said is that he wants this to play out in the court of law and not in front of the media. Back to you.
News Nation's Elizabeth Pran, thank you. And that'll do it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Mychael Schnell. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.